Hi, this is George Lucas, and I'd like to welcome you to the audio commentary on Episode 2. Attack of the Clones is actually a reference that appears in Episode 4 when Princess Leia is asking Obi-Wan for help. And it's the Clone War that is really the centerpiece of the downfall of the Jedi Order and the ultimate rise of the Empire. It's very, very important in the whole epic of Star Wars. In Episode 1, I was able to get rid of all the exposition about how the Senate works, the politics of the Trade Federation, and that sort of thing. So this time I was more free to actually get on with the story of how all this plays into the ultimate demise of the Republic.
The opening scenes with the arrival of the spaceship to be eerie and mysterious, and so the music score was played rather lightly and with high strings and low tones. And this made the design of the spaceship sounds a little difficult because with spaceships, especially those that come thundering right over camera, it's hard to play the sound down when it's visually so big.
Set because we didn't actually build it for Episode 2. We actually took the plate that we had shot on Episode 1, removed the actors, and redid this scene against blue screen and comped them into that spaceship.
Coming out of the fog here was done with computer graphics for the ship and all the buildings. The idea was to have the whole platform kind of enshrouded in fog to set a bit of a somber tone for the scene.
Nation attempt, which was the original story, but I decided that I'd sort of blow up a big spaceship and use a decoy, and I think gave it a more lively opening to the film. I also like the fact that R2 is actually the first character that gets a close-up and is introduced into the movie. It's ultimately R2's story.
In Sydney, we actually ran out of stages, so we turned our art department into a stage itself where we shot this particular sequence. We only built the floor and had the platform coming down for where the actors could walk in, and that's where we did the explosions.
It's computer-generated fire and smoke as well, right?
Most of the fire in that shot is live-action elements that we shot out in the back lot.
Editorially, it was discovered in the first cut of this scene that R2 had been forgotten as a character in this scene, or he wasn't included in the actual script as a character arriving on Coruscant with Padme. So, as an after-the-fact measure, R2 was carefully shot, sometimes the actual R2 model, as well as a digital R2 when necessary, and he was then included into this scene.
We are on Coruscant, and we're heading into Palpatine's office, and sitting there on screen left is a digital Yoda. Yoda was really the reason I wanted to do this movie. George and I had talked about a digital Yoda during Episode 1, and we had done 2 shots of Yoda digitally. There was a walking shot when he was talking to Obi-Wan, and then there was a shot in the funeral. But I felt it was important for us to make the leap and to convince George that we could handle a digital Yoda performance. And you can see in shots like this the care that we put into his eyes, his eyebrows, and then his mouth. We certainly spent a lot of time studying what Frank Oz had done in episode 5, Empire, and looking at the range of performance. Frank and I talked about it at the beginning of the production, and he said, you almost have too much potential. You can do things with your computer-generated Yoda that I could never do with a puppet. And I felt that was right. That I wanted to remain true to the puppet's performance. And here you can see I was walking across the floor. We studied what Frank had done with the puppet, how he moved the puppet, and then sort of extrapolated that down into the walk. I had read, long before I joined ILM, I'd read that George wanted to see Yoda walk, that he felt that he wanted to see that character in a more important role and unrestricted by the techniques that they had done in the 70s and 80s. So this is our first chance to show off what we could do. You can see his clothing, his facial performance, his skin, and even little jitters in his ears. You'll see those. We started animating Yoda, and when we didn't have the jitters in the ears, it didn't look like the puppet. And we wanted it to look just like the puppet, but rated. to we live in now, 22 years ahead. And this shot here became one of George's early favorites. And the reason is because it's acting. He's not speaking, he's acting, and we can tell that he doesn't quite trust what Palpatine's saying in this scene. I remember giving it to Leslie Hedrick, who's one of my animators, and she wasn't too keen on it because it wasn't an acting talking shot in her mind. And I said, Leslie, this is going to become one of the most important shots for Yoda early on in the movie, establishing that this is a legitimate, realistic character in this movie, an important character in this movie, and it certainly became that. You can see the weight as he transfers himself on and off of his cane, and how the clothing interacts with that.
Wasn't in the original script, and when I cut the film together, I realized that I needed an entrance for Anakin and Obi-Wan that was more than him just coming in the door of the apartment. And I needed something that kind of warmed up their relationship a little bit, because in the next scene they actually are at each other's throats a little bit. And I wanted you to establish first that they were partners and friends, and even though there's a little bit of tension between the two of them, they have a history of warm friendship.
Episode 1, we had Ahmed Best in the costume for Jar Jar, walking through every sequence so that we could tell how the clothing was going to react. In this case, this is a fully computer-generated Jar Jar with digital clothing. The thing about the clothing is it has to act and react just like the real clothing. So you can see how they walk into the room here. The real clothing, of course, is flowing back and forth, and so does Jar Jar's. It needs to move and be real. Otherwise, the audience is pulled out of the moment. It doesn't believe that this digital character is really living and breathing in that scene. So this is important for us to make sure we're not calling attention to ourselves. Sometimes it's hard with Jar Jar, but in this case, it's 10 years on. He's now a senator, and he's wearing these elaborate costumes that have been designed by Tricia Biggard, who designed all the costumes for all the live-action characters. You'll see in this shot, when Jar Jar walks through the scene, he walks through and then sits down on the couch. Watch how the clothing folds and sits. I'm bringing it to your attention now so you can study it, but we don't want you to be studying that character. We want you to just take in the scene that it's 5 people sitting down and talking to each other.
The scene establishes the fact that Annie and Padme haven't seen each other in 10 years, so that there's no history that we don't know about. The tough part about this scene is that Obi-Wan is the bit of the conservative of the two, and his character has been established primarily by Alec Guinness in the first trilogy. But I still wanted to give Obi-Wan some charm and some wit, and make him a likable character, and realize that even though he's the stern taskmaster and mentor, he still cares about Anakin. And he's more frustrated with this, their relationship, and Anakin's sort of unwillingness to go along with the rules. Obi-Wan finds himself in the same situation actually that he had with Qui-Gon Jinn, where Qui-Gon Jinn was constantly sort of moving beyond the bounds, and now he's got a apprentice that's doing the same thing.
I'll have an office difficult a sequence to color correct. In other words, to get the colors right. We didn't really have the time to set up properly because we had changed the sequence from a night sequence to a day sequence. So we were fighting the fact that we had to actually move from this location onto another stage. And George kept on changing his mind about the look of what the scene was supposed to look like.
Bounty hunters wanted to deal with Jango Fett, who was Boba Fett's father, and I needed a second bounty hunter who I decided I'd make into a changeling but have her look like a beautiful woman, just so that we had a different take on bounty hunters rather than having an ugly monster. She actually is an ugly monster under her fake facade.
We did one very large matte painting that covers about a 120-degree field of view to be used throughout the scene. Since it had all this moving traffic in it, we did 20 seconds worth of traffic so that we could cover the longest shot we had to deal with.
Obi-Wan and Anakin wait for something to happen. I wanted to establish that Padme was asleep in the other room, that there was a certain amount of security with R2, and that Anakin is a little cocky, a little sure of himself, and constantly chafing a little bit with Obi-Wan.